Captain Vaughn slammed his hand against the nurse's station counter so hard that a clipboard clattered to the floor and every head in the hallway snapped toward him. He pointed one thick finger directly at Kaylin Cross and said loud enough for the entire corridor to hear, "I don't care what the intake sheet says. You are a nurse. A first week, still wet behind the ears, rookie nurse. You do not speak to my men, you do not enter that room without my clearance, and you do not ask me questions about a patient whose existence you are not authorized to acknowledge. Are we absolutely clear?" Kaylin held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. She said nothing. She simply nodded, picked up the clipboard from the floor, and walked away. Nobody in that hallway knew that she had just been given the exact confirmation she needed. Before we go further, if this story already has you leaning in, please subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling us what city you are watching from. We want to see how far this story travels. The night shift at Crest Haven Medical Center started the way all night shifts started, with a handoff that nobody wanted to give and a list of patients that nobody wanted to inherit. The outgoing nurses moved fast, clipping through their notes with the practiced efficiency of people who had already mentally clocked out, who were already thinking about their cars in the parking garage, the drive home, the particular silence of a house after midnight. Kaylin Cross stood at the station and listened to everything they said, and she also listened to everything they did not say. There was a room at the end of the east corridor that none of the outgoing nurses mentioned. Room 114. It had no patient name on the board outside. It had no dietary preferences logged, no family contact listed, no attending physician noted in the system beyond a single set of initials that Kaylin recognized, but kept her expression flat about. The door to room 114 had 2 men standing outside it in civilian clothes that fit just poorly enough to confirm they were not civilians. One of them had his arms crossed. The other was watching the elevator. Neither of them had looked at Kaylin when she walked past. She had been at Crest Haven for 6 days. In those 6 days, she had made exactly the impression she intended to make. She was competent, but not dazzling. She was punctual, but not eager. She asked questions at a frequency that suggested she was learning without suggesting she already knew more than the people teaching her. She made small mistakes on purpose, the kind that were easy to correct and easy to forget, the kind that made senior staff feel comfortable around her. She had worn her hair in the same low ponytail every shift. She had brought the same brand of coffee in the same travel mug. She had laughed at jokes that were not particularly funny and expressed mild stress about paperwork that she could have filed in her sleep. She was by every observable measure unremarkable. That was the point. The East Corridor felt different tonight. She noticed it the way she always noticed things, without visibly noticing, without slowing her pace or letting her eyes linger. There were 4 men in civilian clothes now instead of the 2 she had counted during her previous shift. The security camera at the far end of the hall had been adjusted slightly, the angle tightened. Someone had placed a secondary monitoring station near the utility closet, a compact setup with a screen that was currently showing a feed from inside room 114. Kaylin did not look at the monitor as she passed it. She did not need to. She stopped at the medication card outside room 112 and began checking a chart, her pen moving across the paper with calm, deliberate strokes. 2 of the men near room 114 were talking, keeping their voices low, but not as low as they believed. She caught the words elevated cortisol and neurological spike, and then one of them said, "Vaughn wants eyes on him every 4 minutes, no exceptions." And the other one said, "He's not going to last through a full protocol at this rate." And the first one said, "That's not our problem. Our problem is keeping him contained until extraction." Kaylin turned a page on the chart. Her hand was completely steady. She had been briefed that Asset Zero had been transported to Crest Haven 11 days ago, following a mission that had gone wrong in a way that several very powerful people were still arguing about in closed rooms. His injuries were extensive. His condition was classified. His identity was classified. The nature of the titanium neural implant embedded in the base of his skull was classified at a level that Kaylin knew most of the people currently guarding him did not have clearance to understand. What they had been told was that he was dangerous. What they had been told was that under no circumstances should he be allowed to regain full consciousness without authorized medical personnel present. What they had not been told was what authorized actually meant, or who qualified. Captain Vaughn believed he qualified. Vaughn was wrong, and Kaylin had known that since the moment she read his file. She moved to her next patient. Room 110, an elderly man named Mr. Aldrich who had been admitted for a cardiac event and who liked to argue about the temperature of his room and who tonight told her that the man at the end of the hall had been making sounds earlier. Kaylin checked Mr. Aldrich's chart. She adjusted his blanket. She said in the gentlest voice she owned, "What kind of sounds?" Mr. Aldrich frowned toward the wall as if he could see through it. He said, "Like someone trying very hard not to make any sounds at all." Kaylin wrote something in the chart. She thanked Mr. Aldrich. She stepped back into the hallway. Her earpiece was not active tonight. She had made the decision to go dark on comms until she had a clearer read on what Vaughn's team knew and what they suspected. Going dark carried risk, but going live and being detected carried a different kind of risk, the kind that ended missions and exposed covers and put people in rooms that had no windows and no official record of ever existing. She was walking toward the nurse's station when Captain Vaughn came around the corner from the stairwell. He was a large man built with the particular density of someone who had spent decades treating his body as a tool rather than a home. His jaw was set in a way that suggested it was always set that way. He had the kind of eyes that scanned a room and immediately categorized everything in it by threat level. And when those eyes landed on Kaylin, they categorized her in less than a second and moved on, which was exactly what she had spent 6 days engineering. He walked directly to the nurse's station and put his hands flat on the counter and spoke to the charge nurse, a woman named Denise, who had worked nights at Crest Haven for 11 years and who Kaylin had observed was exceptionally good at not reacting to things that frightened her. Vaughn said, "I need confirmation that no unauthorized personnel have accessed the East Corridor in the last 2 hours." Denise pulled up the access log on her screen. She said, "Dr. Ferris came through at 9:40 for a consult. 2 of your men went in at 10:15. Nurse Cross did her preliminary rounds at 10:30 but didn't enter the room." Vaughn turned his head and looked at Kaylin for the first time. She was writing in a chart. She did not look up immediately. When she did, she let her expression register the mild, slightly uncertain look of someone who had just realized they were being looked at by someone important and was not sure why. Vaughn said, "You're the new one." She said, "Yes, sir, Kaylin Cross. I started last week." He studied her for a moment the way people study things they have already decided are not worth their time. Then he said, "Stay away from the East Corridor past the second room. You don't ask questions about it. You don't walk past it unless you have a specific reason. And if any of my personnel speak to you, you respond and you move on. Clear?" She said, "Of course. Is there anything I should know for patient care purposes? I just want to make sure I'm not." That was when he slammed his hand on the counter. That was when the clipboard hit the floor. That was when he told her in a voice calibrated to be heard by everyone in the hallway exactly what she was and what she was not allowed to do. She picked up the clipboard. She nodded. She walked away. And she noted that Vaughn's hand, when it had hit the counter, had been shaking. Not with anger, with something else. With the particular vibration of a man who was more afraid than he was letting anyone see. Something had already changed with Asset Zero, something Vaughn had not planned for. The next 40 minutes were the most critical stretch of the night, and Kaylin knew it. She moved through her rounds with the same measured pace as always, but beneath the surface of her routine, every sense she had was fully engaged, tracking mapping, calculating. She clocked the positions of Vaughn's men. She timed the intervals between their check-ins. She noted which of them were communicating with each other and which were receiving information from somewhere else, an external source, a command structure that operated separately from whatever Vaughn thought he was running here. There were 4 of them that she had visual confirmation of. She suspected 2 more were positioned in locations she hadn't been able to verify yet, likely the stairwell access on the east side and possibly the utility corridor that ran parallel to the east wing. That was standard coverage for an asset at this classification level. Standard and also insufficient, which told her something important about how the people who had authorized this placement understood the actual threat profile of what they were guarding. They thought they were containing a patient. They were not containing a patient. At 11:17, the first anomaly appeared on the monitoring screen near the utility closet. She was passing it with a supply cart when she caught the edge of the readout in her peripheral vision, and what she saw made the hair on her arms rise in a way that she controlled immediately and completely, suppressing it before it reached the surface of her face. The neural activity wave on the screen was not the flat sedation-suppressed pattern of someone in a medically managed unconscious state. It was irregular. It was rising. It had the distinctive double-peak signature that she had spent 8 months learning to recognize in a facility that she was not allowed to name in any document that might be subject to a Freedom of Information request. He was waking up. Not slowly, not gently. He was surfacing the way someone surfaces when their body has overridden the suppression, when the neurological architecture built into them has decided that whatever danger is present exceeds whatever rest they were being forced into. She needed to get into that room. She needed to get in there before the monitors triggered an alert that would bring Vaughn and all 4 of his visible men into a confined space with a disoriented, combat-conditioned asset who would process that cluster of bodies as a threat formation in the first 2 seconds of consciousness. She turned the supply cart toward the east corridor. One of Vaughn's men stepped into her path. He was young, mid-20s, with the kind of flat professional expression that took years of training to develop. He said, "East corridor access is restricted past room 112. She held up the supply cart handle and said in a tone of mild professional inconvenience, "I have to restock the supply closet at the end of the hall. It's on the schedule." He said, "I'll need to verify that." She said, "Of course, I can wait." And she pulled out her phone and started reviewing something on the screen with the expression of someone who had 17 other things to do and was being patient about this one. He got on his radio. He spoke quietly. He listened. He frowned. A second man appeared from near the stairwell access, and they conferred briefly, their backs slightly to her. And in those 10 seconds, Kaylin did 3 things simultaneously. She confirmed that the monitoring screen she could see from her current position was now showing a 3rd neural activity peak, sharper than the first 2. She confirmed that neither of these men had a direct line of sight to the door of room 114 from where they were standing. And she confirmed the position of the keycard reader on the door, which she had already known, but was now recalculating approach angles for. The first man turned back and said, "Someone will escort you to the supply closet. Just give us a minute." She said, "Of course, take your time." Somewhere behind the door of room 114, Ronan was waking up. And in 43 seconds, if the pattern she was tracking held the neural implant at the base of his skull, was going to interpret the unfamiliar environment in the cluster of armed bodies outside his door as a hostile perimeter. And his training was going to kick in with the full catastrophic force of everything that had been built into him over the course of a program that had cost more money than Kaylin was cleared to know the actual number for. And it was going to kick in before he was conscious enough to override it. She had to get to him before that happened. She had to get into that room, and she had to speak to him before his body made the decision that his mind hadn't been given a chance to make. The second man was walking toward her now, positioning himself to escort her to the supply closet, which was 20 feet in the wrong direction. She looked at his face and he looked at hers, and for the single fraction of a second, something passed between them that was not hostility and not recognition, but was something adjacent to both the particular silent acknowledgement of 2 people who have been trained well enough to sense when someone else has also been trained well. His hand moved fractionally toward his side, and then every light in the east corridor went red. Not all the lights, not the overheads, but the emergency indicator, strips along the base of the walls, the ones that activated under a specific monitoring threshold, the ones that the hospital's standard staff had never once seen engage in the 11 years that Denise had worked nights here. Those strips went red, and the sound that accompanied them was not an alarm. It was a tone, a single low sustained tone that came from the monitoring station near the utility closet and meant something specific to exactly 3 people in this building tonight. The 2 men near Kaylin heard it and looked at each other, and the one closest to her said, "What is that?" with the voice of someone whose training had not included whatever protocol had just activated. Kaylin was already moving. She did not run. Running drew attention and wasted energy and communicated panic to everyone who saw it. She walked fast with the specific, purposeful stride of a medical professional responding to a patient need, and she had her keycard out and was at the door of room 114 before either of the men had fully processed what she was doing. The first one said, Hey, stop." She swiped the card. The reader beeped. The door opened. She went through it. Inside the room was dim lit only by the monitoring equipment, and Ronan was not lying down. He was sitting upright. His restraints, which had been designed for a patient with enhanced physical capacity and had been tested to a threshold that the engineers were confident about, were broken. Not bent, not loosened. broken with a clean mechanical failure at 2 of the 4 anchor points that told Kalen more about the current state of his system than any readout on any screen could have told her. He was looking directly at her. His eyes were open and they were focused, and they were running through the specific sequential assessment that she recognized because she had helped write the behavioral protocol that described it. He was calculating distance. He was calculating number of bodies. He was calculating exit routes and threat vectors and the probability weight of each person in his immediate environment. He had not yet reached the phase of that assessment where prior relationship recognition could override the threat classification. She had approximately at each seconds. She said in a voice that was steady and low and carried exactly the tonal frequency that the protocol specified for initial contact during unplanned activation. Ronan, my name is Kalen. You are in a medical facility. You have been injured. You are not in a hostile environment. He blinked once, his jaw tightened. She said, "You're looking at me like I'm a target. I need you to hear my voice and not your training for the next 30 seconds. Can you do that?" Behind her, the door opened, and one of Vaughn's men came through it with his hand on the weapon at his hip and said, "Ma'am, you need to step away from..." Ronan's head moved toward the sound, and his entire body shifted in a single fluid motion, and Kalen said sharply, without looking away from Ronan, "Do not draw that weapon. If you draw that weapon, every person in this building is in danger. Keep your hands visible and do not move." The man stopped. Ronan's eyes came back to her. She said, "That's right. Look at me. Just me." His breathing was controlled in the way that breathing is controlled when someone is exerting enormous effort to remain still. His hands, free from the broken restraints, were flat against the mattress. He was giving her the 30 seconds she had asked for. She had never worked with an asset who had given her the 30 seconds on the first ask. She said, "I know you don't fully know where you are yet. I know the implant is running assessments, and I know what those assessments are telling you about this room and the people outside it. I need you to listen to my voice and hold off on any response for 60 more seconds. Just 60. After that, you make whatever call you decide to make. But give me 60 seconds. Something moved across his face. Not softness, not warmth. Something older than both of those things. Something that looked like the recognition of a voice that had been spoken to him before in some other context, in some other dark room, in some other moment when everything was wrong, and there was only one person in it worth listening to. He said in a voice that was rough with disuse and pain, in the specific flatness of someone running on pure physiological override, 60 seconds. She exhaled once controlled and quiet. Outside the door, she could hear Vaughn's voice in the corridor getting louder, getting closer, approaching, with the particular urgency of a man who has just been told that something he thought he controlled has stopped being controllable. And inside the room, she had 60 seconds and a broken man with a weapon capable of taking down everyone in the building. And she had a code that she had been carrying for 8 months without ever speaking aloud. And she was deciding in real time whether tonight was the night it got spoken. Vaughn hit the door. He pushed it open. He took in the scene in front of him with the eyes of a man who processes information quickly and still could not make sense of what he was seeing. The rookie nurse was standing 3 feet from Asset Zero. Asset Zero was upright, unrestrained, and looking at the rookie nurse like she was the only stable point in a room that was spinning. Vaughn said, "What in the hell is going on in here?" Ronan's eyes moved to Vaughn. His body began the assessment again. The 8 seconds started over. Kalen said without turning around, "Captain Vaughn, I need you to lower your voice, step back outside this room, and take your men with you. Right now." Vaughn said, "Who do you think you are talking to?" She said, "Ma'am, I think I am talking to the man whose entire team is about to be in serious danger if he does not do what I just told him to do. So I am asking you one more time, lower your voice, step back, take your men." Vaughn opened his mouth. Ronan reached under the edge of the mattress and pulled out a weapon that no one had searched for because no one had believed he was conscious enough to have placed it there, and the sound of it in his hands was the loudest thing in the room. Every person in the doorway went completely still. Kalen did not move. She said quietly, 60 seconds, Ronan. You gave me 60 seconds. You still have 20 left." The room did not breathe. Ronan's hand was steady on the weapon. His eyes were on Vaughn. His jaw was set. And somewhere in the architecture of what had been built into him, in the layers of protocol and conditioning and response patterns that had been refined over years of operations that Kaylin had studied, in documents she had memorized and then destroyed, somewhere in all of that, something was waiting. Something was listening to her voice count down the seconds. Something was choosing in the slim and terrifying gap between instinct and action to wait. Kaylin said 18. Vaughn said under his breath to the man beside him, "Get Harmon on the line." Kaylin said, "Ronan, the 60 seconds ends with you making a choice. I am asking you to make the right one. You know me. You may not know that you know me yet, but you know me, P." Something shifted. Something changed in the set of his shoulders, in the angle of his head, in the quality of his stillness. It was not surrender. It was not softness. It was recognition, slow and incomplete, and fighting its way through layers of damage and medication in the particular fog of a mind that had been pushed to its limits and was still even now trying to function. He said, "What is your authorization?" She told him. "Not the kill switch, not yet." She told him the 3-letter field designation that she had been assigned on the day she took this assignment, the identifier that existed in his programming, alongside her biometric data, in her voice pattern, and her clearance level. The identifier that told his implant, in whatever language implants spoke to the machinery of a human nervous system, that this person is authorized. This person is not a threat. This person is the one you wait for. He lowered the weapon. The room exhaled. Vaughn stared at her. His face had gone through something in the last 30 seconds that Kaylin had watched happen to faces before. It had gone from anger to confusion to the particular ashen shock of a man who has just realized that the situation he believed he was managing has never at any point tonight been his to manage. He said slowly, "Who are you?" She turned around for the first time. She looked at him directly the way she had not been looking at him for 6 days, without the uncertainty, without the mild deference, without any of the performance she had been maintaining since the first moment she walked through the front doors of this hospital. She said, "My name is Kaylin Cross. I am a level 4 authorized handler for this asset. I outrank this operation by 2 clearance levels, and I need you to get your men out of this corridor and establish a perimeter at the building exits. We have approximately 8 minutes before the reason I was sent here becomes very apparent to everyone in this building." Vaughn said, "What reason?" She looked past him down the corridor toward the lobby, toward the front entrance of the hospital, where the security feeds were currently being cycled by someone on the outside, where the external communication lines were being rerouted by something she had started tracking 3 hours ago and had hoped she was wrong about. She said, "Someone knows he's here, and they're already inside." Vaughn did not move for 3 full seconds. That was how long it took for the information Kaylin had just given him to travel from his ears to the part of his brain that made operational decisions, and when it arrived badly. She could see it happen in his face. The rearrangement of assumptions, the collapse of a framework he had been operating inside of for 11 days, the one where he was in charge, where the asset was contained, where the rookie nurse at the end of the hall was exactly what her paperwork said she was. He said, "Inside, what do you mean inside?" She said, "I mean that the external communication lines for this building were rerouted 47 minutes ago. I mean that your perimeter team on the north exit checked in at 10:52 and has not checked in since. I mean that the security feed cycling on camera 7 started 3 hours and 19 minutes ago, which is how long someone has been watching this corridor without your team knowing they were watching it." She paused. "Which of those would you like me to explain first?" Vaughn turned to the man beside him and said, "Get Harmon and Chen, now." Then he turned back to Kaylin, and his voice had shifted, not softer, not gentler, but recalibrated the way a man recalibrates when the map he was using turns out to be someone else's map. He said, "You've been tracking this since you got here." "Since before I got here," she said. Behind her, Ronan had not moved from the edge of the bed. He was holding the weapon loosely with the practiced non-grip of someone who had been trained not to telegraph intent through tension. His eyes were moving between Kaylin and Vaughn with the careful, even rhythm of someone running continuous threat assessment and finding both of them for the moment below the line. Vaughn looked past Kaylin at Ronan, and something complicated moved across his face. He said, "He's fully conscious." "Yes, that's not possible. The sedation protocol. His system metabolizes sedatives at roughly 3 times the standard rate. It's in the file." She let that sit for exactly 1 beat. The file you were given access to. Vaughn's jaw tightened. He knew and she knew he knew that he had not read the full file. Nobody read the full file on an asset at this classification. The files were long and technical and written by people who assumed the reader had background knowledge that most readers did not have. People skimmed. People read the operational summary and the threat assessment and the behavioral flags and thought that was enough. It was never enough. Ronan said from behind her in that same flat, rough voice, "Kaylin." She turned. He was looking at the door. Not at Vaughn, not at the man in the corridor. At the door itself, at the gap at the bottom of it, at something she couldn't see, but that he clearly could or could hear or could detect through whatever refined version of instinct had been sharpened in him over years of operating in environments where the difference between sensing something and not sensing it was the difference between alive and not. He said, "2, moving from the north stairwell, 40 seconds, maybe less." Vaughn said, "How does he?" Kaylin said, "Get your men back from the north stairwell, right now." Vaughn hesitated for exactly 1 second too long, and she saw it, and so did Ronan. And Ronan stood up from the bed with a fluidity that had no business existing in a body that had been through what his had been through in the last 11 days, and he crossed the room in 4 steps and put his back against the wall beside the door, in a position that was not defensive and was not passive, and was the specific posture of someone preparing to act rather than react. Vaughn got on his radio. He said, "All units north stairwell, pull back to the east corridor junction. Now, do not engage. Repeat, do not engage, pull back." Static, a broken response. 2 words that came through clearly, and neither of them were reassuring. Vaughn looked at his radio. He looked at Kaylin. He said, "North stairwell team is not responding." She said, "I know." "What do you mean you know?" "I mean, I have known for 22 minutes that the north stairwell team was the first likely point of contact, and I needed to confirm it before I moved. I've confirmed it." His voice went quiet and hard. "You knew my men might be compromised, and you waited." "I waited until I had Asset Zero conscious and responsive, so that when the building went active, we had him as a controlled element instead of an uncontrolled one. If I had moved earlier and he was still partially sedated and the building went active, we would have had 2 threats to manage instead of 1. She met his eyes. "I made a calculation. I stand behind it." Vaughn looked at her the way men look at people who have made decisions that cost something and were right anyway, which was to say he looked at her with a kind of furious, reluctant respect that he had absolutely no intention of expressing out loud. Ronan said from his position by the door, "They're on this floor." Nobody asked how he knew. The fact of it was already moving through the room, shifting everyone's posture, pulling focus, collapsing the space between debate and action. Kaylin said, "Ronan, the protocol is assess and contain, non-lethal if possible. The hospital has patients on this floor, 3 of whom are non-ambulatory. Whatever happens in that corridor needs to stay in that corridor," he said without looking away from the door. "Understood." Vaughn said, "He takes orders from you." She said, "He follows protocol established by his authorization hierarchy. Right now, I am the highest authorized person in this building. So yes." Vaughn made a sound that was not quite a word and got on his radio again and started repositioning his remaining men with a speed and clarity that told Kaylin he was, whatever else, he was genuinely good at the tactical piece of this. He got Chen to the corridor junction. He got Harmon outside the room with a sight line to the stairwell door. He pulled the 2 men from the south access point and sent one to the lobby and kept one at the nurse's station, where Denise was, to her considerable credit, still sitting at her desk with the expression of someone who had decided that the most useful thing she could do was stay exactly where she was and keep the rest of the floor functioning. Then the stairwell door opened. They came through fast, 2 of them moving with the low, tight efficiency of people who had done this before and had not expected the level of reception they received because Harmon was already positioned and Chen was already moving, and the first one through the door went down in the corridor with a sound that was brief and definitive. The second one reacted faster than Kaylin had anticipated, pulling back through the door and letting it close, and then there was a moment of quiet that was worse than the sound had been. Ronan said, "There's a third one, not in the stairwell, somewhere else." Vaughn said into his radio, "Chen, hold position. Harmon, report." Harmon's voice came back, clipped and steady. "Target 1 is down and contained. Target 2 pulled back to stairwell. No visual on additional contacts." Kaylin was running the building layout in her mind. The north stairwell connected to the service corridor on the basement level. The service corridor connected to the utility access that ran under the east wing. If someone had come in through the north stairwell, and if there was a third contact that Ronan had sensed, but that had not entered through the same point, then the third one had not come through the stairwell at all. She said the utility access under the east wing. Is there a physical lock on the interior panel, or is it keycard? Vaughn looked at her. Keycard. Who has access to that system? Hospital facilities. My team lead, and... He stopped. She said, and whoever rerouted your external communications 3 hours ago, who would have pulled the access credentials from the same system at the same time. She was already moving toward the door. Where does the utility access come up? Vaughn said, supply closet, end of the east corridor. The supply closet that she had been trying to reach with the card an hour ago. The supply closet that Vaughn's man had been walking her toward at the exact moment the monitoring alert had activated. The supply closet that was 12 feet from the room where Ronan had been lying unconscious and restrained and entirely unaware that someone had been planning for at least 3 hours to come up through the floor. She said, Ronan with me. Captain, get everyone away from the east corridor. Vaughn said, you are not going down that hall with an unsecured iron. Ronan was already through the door. She followed him and Vaughn said something behind them that she chose not to hear. And then he was following too, because whatever else was true about Vaughn, he was not the kind of man who sent other people toward a threat while he stood in a room and waited. The east corridor was quiet in the specific way that things are quiet when they are about to stop being quiet. The red indicator strips along the floor were still lit. The monitoring station near the utility closet was still running, the screen showing readings that Kaylin glanced at as she passed, and which confirmed that Ronan's implant was fully online, fully active and running at a processing speed that the engineers who designed it had described as theoretically sustainable for periods of intense engagement, not exceeding 90 minutes. They had been at this for 26 minutes. Ronan held up one hand and stopped. She stopped with him. Behind them, Vaughn stopped, and she heard him signal Chen to hold on the radio without making the radio make any sound, which was the kind of operational discipline she had not expected from him, and revised her estimate of him upward slightly because of. Ronan pointed at the supply closet door. He held up one finger. He looked at her. She nodded. He positioned himself to the left of the door. She positioned herself to the right. Vaughn came up behind them, and she felt rather than saw him raise his weapon to a ready position, and she appreciated that he had the sense not to argue about the formation. Ronan reached out and opened the supply closet door. The man inside was not ready for the door to open. He had been listening. Kaylin could tell, positioned just inside the access panel that connected to the utility corridor below, with the panel open and his body half in, half out in the specific awkward posture of someone who had been waiting for a signal and had been waiting too long and had started to wonder if the signal was coming. He came up fast when the door opened. He had a weapon and he brought it up, and Ronan moved in a way that was almost too fast for Kaylin to track. Not brutal, not excessive, but absolutely precise. A redirection of force that turned the man's own momentum against him, and the weapon discharged once into the supply closet ceiling, and then it was on the floor, and the man was on the floor, and Ronan's knee was in his back with a pressure that communicated without any words that the next decision this man made needed to be the correct one. Vaughn said quietly, "That's not one of mine." The man on the floor was not young. He was mid-40s with a particular physical economy of someone who had been in the field a long time. Not special forces, not intelligence, but something adjacent to both the kind of contractor who appeared in the gap between official operations and unofficial outcomes. Kaylin crouched down beside him. She said, "Who sent you?" He said nothing. She said, "You came in through the utility access, which means you had the keycard credentials, which means you had inside access to this building's systems before tonight. That tells me this was planned well in advance. That tells me whoever sent you knew about this asset's presence at this facility and made arrangements before the asset was even transported here." She paused. "Which tells me someone on the authorization chain for this asset's placement is connected to whoever wanted him dead. And that is a very specific kind of information that I think you understand the weight of, because if you understand it, then you know that the only outcome where you see the other side of this night is the one where you start talking." He looked at the floor. His breathing was controlled. He was deciding. Ronan said from above him with no particular inflection, "She's giving you the easy version. Take it." Something in the man's shoulders changed. A minute deflection barely visible, but Kaylin had been reading bodies for years and she caught it. He said, "Clearance code 79er. That's all I'm giving you. Run it, and you'll understand what I can't tell you." She looked at Vaughn. Vaughn looked at her. She said, "Do you have a way to run a clearance code from here?" He said, "Give me 2 minutes." He stepped back with his radio and his phone and a look on his face that had moved past confusion into something more focused, more grim, the look of a man who is beginning to understand that the problem in front of him is significantly larger than the room they are standing in. Ronan eased back slightly from the man on the floor, but did not move away from him. He said to Kaylin in a voice that was quiet enough that it was only for her, "You should have told Vaughn at the start." She said equally quiet, "I told him as soon as I had confirmation." "You had indicators 3 hours ago." "Indicators are not confirmation." He looked at her with the flat assessing look that she had come to understand over months of studying his file, and 8 minutes of being in the same room with him was not coldness, but something much more complex, the expression of someone who has learned to keep everything internal, because external expression was once used against him. He said, "You're better at this than the last one." She said, "The last handler." Yes. She did not ask what had happened to the last handler. She did not ask because she had read that part of the file, and it was one of the 3 sections she had returned to more than once, trying to understand the weight of what she had taken on when she accepted this assignment, trying to understand what it meant to be the person that a man like Ronan was programmed to trust. Vaughn came back. His face was different, not pale, not shocked, but stripped of something, some layer of certainty that had been there before. He said, "The clearance code is real. It's a Tier 1 internal operations code. It belongs to a project that is listed as terminated 18 months ago." He stopped. A project that was supposedly terminated because all assets connected to it had been decommissioned. The man on the floor made a sound that was almost but not quite a laugh. Kaylin stood up. She said, "The project wasn't terminated." Vaughn said, "According to every record I have access to, the project was transferred," she said. "The termination paperwork was filed to close the external record. But the project continued under a different classification umbrella, which is why the people running it needed Ronan out of medical care and out of a recoverable condition, because a recoverable Ronan is a Ronan who can testify to what the project actually was and what it actually produced." She looked at Vaughn steadily. "You were sent here to guard an asset. What you were actually doing was making sure he didn't survive long enough to become a liability to the people who created him." The silence in the corridor was absolute. Vaughn said, "That's not what I was told." "I know it's not what you were told," she said, and her voice was not unkind. "That's how it works. The people who told you were told something different too. It goes all the way up." Vaughn looked at Ronan. Ronan looked back at him with an expression that was not anger and was not forgiveness, but contained something of both the expression of a man who has had a long time to sit with the knowledge that the people who built him were not the people he had believed they were, and who had arrived at something on the other side of that knowledge that was not peace, but was at least stable enough to stand on. Vaughn said to Ronan, "Did you know about the project?" Ronan said, "I knew enough." "Why didn't you?" "Because I woke up in a hospital 11 days ago with broken ribs and a neural implant that was running at 40% capacity, and the first faces I saw when I could focus were 4 armed men who I had no framework to trust, and the woman I needed to reach hadn't arrived yet." He looked at Kaylin. "Until tonight." Vaughn rubbed one hand across the back of his neck in the gesture of a man recalibrating everything at once. He said, "If what you're telling me is right, then the 2 contacts in the stairwell and this one," he looked at the man on the floor, "they weren't sent to retrieve the asset. They were sent to eliminate him." Kaylin said, "And anyone who could verify his identity in the existence of the project." Vaughn was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That includes my team." "Yes," she said, "it does." He looked at the man on the floor. He looked at the utility access panels still open, connecting down to the service corridor below. He looked at the length of the east corridor, the red indicator strips along the floor, the monitoring screen still running its feeds. He was running math that Kaylin could see in his face, adding up the exposure, the vector, the implication of what it meant that the North Stairwell team still hadn't checked in. He said, wait, how many more are coming? She said, I don't know, but I know the ones we've dealt with tonight were the advanced element. They were supposed to confirm the asset's location and status and clear the path. When they don't check in, whoever sent them will know the path isn't clear, which means we have a window, a narrow one. He straightened. He got on his radio, and he started giving orders in the clipped, rapid shorthand of a man who has made a decision and is not interested in second-guessing it, repositioning his team, calling for a hard perimeter on the building exits, pulling the lobby contact to the east wing, directing Chen to secure the stairwell access from above. He did it fast, and he did it well, and when he was done, he turned back to Kaylin and said, "What do you need?" She said, "I need a secure line out of this building that bypasses the hospital's main communication infrastructure. I need Ronan in a position where he can move without exposing the non-ambulatory patients on this floor. And I need you to trust me for the next 30 minutes, even when what I'm doing doesn't look like what you do." Vaughn said, "I have a satellite unit in my kit at the nurse's station. It'll get you a secure channel." He paused. "The other two things are already done." She looked at him. He was telling the truth. She had learned to read that particular quality in people, the moment when all the performance and the positioning falls away, and what's left is just a person being honest about where they stand, and Vaughn was standing in a place that was uncomfortable for him and unfamiliar, and he was doing it anyway because his men were in danger, and the woman in front of him had been the only person in this building all night who knew what was actually happening. She said, "Thank you, Captain." He said gruffly, "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when we're all standing outside of this building in the morning." Ronan was already back in the corridor, positioned at the junction, watching the stairwell door, with the patient absolute stillness of someone for whom waiting is not passive but active, a form of readiness that simply does not make any visible sound. Kaylin moved to the nurse's station. Denise looked up at her with eyes that had absorbed everything that had happened in the last 40 minutes and had made some private internal accommodation with it that had resulted in her remaining functional and calm. Denise said, "Do you need me to do anything?" Kaylin said, "Keep your patients calm. If any of them hear something in the next 20 minutes, tell them it's a mechanical issue with the ventilation system. And if anyone other than me, Captain Vaughn, or the man down the hall asks you to do anything at all, you tell them no and you call out." Denise said, "The man down the hall, the one who broke his own restraints." Kaylin said, "Yes." Denise thought about this for a moment. Then she said, "He's going to be all right, and isn't he?" Kaylin picked up Vaughn's satellite unit from behind the station. She looked at Denise and she said with more certainty than she entirely felt, "That's what I'm here for." She moved back toward the east corridor, and she was 3 steps from the nurse's station when the utility access panel in the supply closet made a sound that it should not have made, and Ronan's voice came from down the hall, sharp and immediate. He said, "Kaylin, second wave." And then the lights in the east corridor went out completely. The darkness lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds was enough. Kaylin heard Ronan move before she could see him move. The sound of controlled weight shifting fast in the corridor, and then Chen's voice from the stairwell junction said something clipped and urgent into his radio, and Vaughn's voice came back over it, and then there was a sound from inside the supply closet that was not the man they had already contained. It was something below him, something coming up through the utility access panel that the first wave had left open when they pulled him out of it. Kaylin dropped to one knee behind the nurse's station counter. She had the satellite unit in her left hand, and her right hand found the edge of the counter, and she used it to orient herself in the dark, while her eyes adjusted and her mind ran the geometry of the floor. Every doorway, every junction, every room with a non-ambulatory patient who could not move themselves out of the path of whatever was coming up through that panel. The emergency lighting came on, not the full overheads, the low red-tinted backup strips along the floor, and the ceiling edges enough to see shapes and movement, not enough to see faces or read expressions, just enough to make everything look like the inside of something that was about to go very wrong. Vaughn was at the corridor junction with Harmon. She could see them from her position. Vaughn had his weapon up, and he was talking into his radio with the tight economy of someone who has stopped explaining and started directing. Harmon was watching the supply closet door, which was still open, and from inside it came a sound that Kaylin recognized as 2 people navigating a confined vertical space in a hurry. Ronan was 4 feet from the supply closet door. "Deux soirs," she said sharply. "Ronan back." He didn't move back. He said without turning, I have the angle. There are two of them and you don't have cover. I don't need cover. She opened her mouth and then the supply closet door swung fully open and two figures came through it in fast succession and Ronan was already moving. And everything happened in the space of about 4 seconds that Kaylin would later be unable to fully sequence in her memory because her attention was splitting between Ronan and the satellite unit in her hand and the sound coming from the stairwell door at the far end of the corridor, which had just opened. A third contact, not from below, from above. She said Vaughn's stairwell. He was already turning. Chen was already moving. The contact from the stairwell was moving fast and low and had a different build than the two from the utility access, leaner, faster, with a particular aggressive economy of someone who had been sent specifically for a high-value target and who had planned for resistance. This one was not going for Ronan. He was going for Kaylin. She understood it in the same instant. She saw it in his trajectory, and she was moving before the understanding was fully verbal in her mind, pushing back from the nurse's station, putting the counter between herself and the angle of approach, keeping the satellite unit against her body, because losing it was not an option she was prepared to accept. He came over the counter. He was fast, and she was faster than he had expected, which she could tell from the fractional adjustment he had to make in the air, and that adjustment cost him the clean landing he needed, and he came down slightly off balance, and she used that. She drove her elbow into the inside of his forearm and redirected his momentum sideways, and he hit the back wall of the nurse's station, and she was already stepping back and putting distance between them, because she was not going to fight this man in a closed space with medical equipment, and she was not going to drop the satellite unit. Denise was not at the desk. Good. Kaylin had told her to move at the first sign of direct engagement, and she had moved. The man at the wall recovered faster than she would have liked. He turned and looked at her, and in the red emergency light, she could see his face clearly for the first time, and she recognized something in it, not his face specifically. She had never seen this man before, but the quality of his training, the particular way he held himself, the way his eyes moved, it matched a profile she had read. It matched the operational fingerprint of a unit that was supposed to have been disbanded when the project was terminated. She said, "Your 7th contingency." He stopped moving. She said, "The project pulled you out of 7th contingency when it went dark. You've been running under the new classification umbrella for 18 months, which means you know exactly what Ronan is and exactly what he knows, and you are here because the people running your unit cannot afford to have him walk out of this building." He said carefully, "You know too much for a nurse." She said, "I know, that's the problem." He moved. She was ready for it, and she was still not entirely ready for it because he was very good and the space was tight, and he caught her left arm, and the satellite unit hit the floor, and she heard it and felt the loss of it like a physical thing, but she could not stop to pick it up because his other hand was going for her throat, and she brought her knee up and felt it connect and heard his exhale and drove the heel of her palm upward. He went down, he got up, he was bleeding from his lower lip and looking at her with an expression that had gone past professional and into something more personal, the look of someone reassessing a threat level in real time and not enjoying the direction of the revision. From the corridor, Ronan's voice, "Kaylin." Not a question, a check. She said, "I'm standing." Ronan appeared in the entrance to the nurse's station. He took in the situation in 1 second. He looked at the man across from her. The man looked at Ronan, and something happened in his face, something that Kaylin had never seen happen to a trained operative. Quite that fast, a visible contraction of resolve, not fear exactly, but the specific recognition that the calculation has changed and the new answer is not survivable. Ronan said to the man very quietly, "Put it down." The man still had his secondary weapon. He had not drawn it during the engagement with Kaylin because drawing it in a confined space against a hand-to-hand opponent was a liability, but it was there, and his hand was moving toward it now, and Ronan said again with no additional force, but with an absolute bone-level certainty that seemed to come from somewhere below volume, "Put it down." The weapon went to the floor. The man's hands went to the counter surface. He was breathing hard and looking at neither of them. He was looking at the floor, and in the particular quality of that look, Kaylin recognized something she had not expected to see tonight in an operative of this level. He was done. not tactically outmaneuvered. Done in the deeper sense, the way people are done when the thing they have been told they are fighting for reveals itself to be something they cannot justify anymore. She picked up the satellite unit. The casing was cracked along one edge, but the unit itself, when she powered it on, gave her the indicator, light she needed. Vaughn appeared at the entrance to the nurse's station. He was breathing fast, and there was something on his left sleeve that she chose not to look at directly. He said, "The corridor is contained. Chen has the stairwell. Harmon is securing the utility access from the basement level up." He looked at the man by the counter. "This is 3 separate entry points. That's not a retrieval team. That's a termination package." She said, "I know." A termination package at this scale authorized against a contained asset in a civilian medical facility. He stopped. He was doing the math again, the same math he had been doing since she told him about the project. And the answer kept coming out the same way, and he kept not wanting to accept it. This was internally authorized. Someone with standing authorization over this operation signed off on sending a termination package into a civilian hospital. She said yes. That is not a field decision. That is not a rogue contractor. That is someone at the level of, I know what level it is, she said, which is why I need this satellite unit operational, and I need to make a call in the next 10 minutes before the window closes. He looked at her, and she could see him deciding something. Not about tactics, about her, about how much of what she had told him tonight he was going to accept on the basis of what he had seen and what he had not yet verified, but was starting to believe anyway, because the alternative, the version where none of this was true, had stopped being available to him somewhere around the moment the lights went out. He said, "Make your call." She moved to the far end of the nurse's station where the emergency lighting was slightly better, and she powered up the satellite unit, and she began entering an access sequence that she had memorized 11 months ago and had never used because you only used it when everything else had been exhausted and the situation had escalated beyond the threshold of local management. The unit connected. It took 47 seconds, and each of those seconds was very loud in her chest. A voice came through the unit. It was a woman's voice, clipped and precise, with the particular neutrality of someone who worked a comms desk at a level where neutrality was a professional requirement. She said, "Authenticate." Kaylin gave her authentication, name, designation, mission code, and a 6-digit sequence that changed every 72 hours, and that Kaylin had checked before she came into the hospital tonight and had been holding in the front of her mind ever since. A pause, 14 seconds. The woman said, "You are authenticated. Go ahead." Kaylin said, "I need to report an active termination package deployed against Asset 0 at Crest Haven Medical Center. Authorization origin appears to be internal Tier 1 clearance level. The package included a minimum of 5 operatives with 7th contingency training signatures. 3 are currently contained. Status of the North Stairwell Perimeter team assigned to the asset's protective detail is unknown and presumed compromised. Asset 0 is conscious, mobile, and operational. I am requesting immediate external verification of authorization chain for this asset's placement and an emergency recall order for any active operational units connected to the terminated project." The silence on the other end was the kind of silence that comes from people in a room deciding very quickly how seriously to take what they have just heard. The woman said, "Stand by." Kaylin stood by. Behind her, she could hear Vaughn talking to his team in the corridor, his voice low and methodical, doing the work of a leader who has had the ground shift under him and is rebuilding his footing in real time. She could hear Ronan somewhere nearby, not moving, not speaking, present in the particular way that he was present, fully and completely and without any wasted expression of it. The man from the nurse's station was sitting on the floor with Harmon standing over him. He had not spoken since he put his weapon down. He was somewhere internal doing the kind of quiet reckoning that people do when a decision they made a long time ago has arrived at its full consequence, and there is nothing left to do but sit with it. The satellite unit spoke again. Not the woman this time, a different voice. Male, older, with the specific weight of someone who did not get on personal comms lines unless the situation demanded it, and who was now on a personal comms line. He said, "Handler Cross." She said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I have your report in front of me. I need you to tell me in your own words what you believe the authorization origin of tonight's operation is." She said, "Based on the clearance code provided by the first contained operative, the operational fingerprint of the second wave and the specific targeting priority that shifted from Asset 0 to his handler. Once the first phase failed, I believe tonight's termination package was authorized by someone with standing oversight of both the original project and its classified continuation. I believe that person became aware that Asset Zero was recovering ahead of projected timeline and made the decision to accelerate elimination before he reached a condition where he could formally testify. A pause, then he said, "That would require authorization from inside the Joint Oversight Committee." She said, "Yes, sir, it would." Another pause, longer this time. She waded through it and did not fill it because the man on the other end of the line needed the space to process what she had just said, and she needed him to process it without her steering him. He said, "Handler Cross, I am issuing an emergency hold on all operational units connected to the classified continuation program effective immediately. I am also authorizing a full verification audit of the authorization chain for Asset Zero's placement at Crest Haven. You are directed to maintain asset security at your current location, pending extraction team arrival. Estimated arrival 45 minutes. He paused. "And Handler Cross, are you intact?" She said, "Yes, sir." "And the asset?" She looked down the corridor to where Ronan was standing at the junction, still and watchful in the red emergency light. She said, "The asset is intact." The line closed. She set the satellite unit down on the counter and stood still for a moment, not because she needed to rest, but because the body requires a moment sometimes to catch up with the decisions the mind has already made, and her body was only now registering the full weight of the last 2 hours. Vaughn came back into the nurse's station. He looked at her face and he said, "External contact made." She said, "Extraction in 45 minutes. Hold order issued on the continuation program. Verification audit authorized." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You just implicated someone on the Joint Oversight Committee." She said, "Yes." He said, "That is not a small thing." She said, "No, it isn't." He looked at her with an expression that was no longer the controlled professional assessment of the beginning of the night. It was something more honest than that, something that carried the fatigue and the recalibration and the particular discomfort of a man who has spent a career inside a system and has just watched someone he underestimated pull a thread that goes all the way to the top of it. He said, "When you came in here 6 days ago, the low profile, the coffee, the clipboard, all of it." She said, "Yes. You were protecting him from the beginning." She said, "I was protecting the situation. Ronan was part of the situation." Vaughn said, "Is there a difference?" She thought about that for a moment. It was a better question than she had expected from him, and she gave it a better answer than a deflection. She said, "Early on, no, the mission and the person are the same until they're not. But somewhere around 11 days ago, when I read the file on what they did to him in the program, what they actually did, the full record." She stopped. She looked at the corridor. There stopped being a difference. Vaughn said nothing. He understood the shape of what she had said, even if he didn't have the specifics to fill it in, and he had the decency not to press. Ronan walked back from the corridor junction. He moved to the nurse's station entrance and stopped there, not coming inside, keeping his position where he could see both directions of the corridor. He said to Kaylin, "The call went through us." It was not a question. She said, 45 minutes. He nodded once. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "The man you contained, the one who came for you, not for me." She said, "Seventh contingency, he recognized the project." Ronan said, "He also recognized you." She looked at him. She said, "What makes you say that?" Ronan said, "The way he stopped when you said the unit designation, he stopped the way people stop when someone knows something they weren't supposed to be able to know. That's not a tactical stop. That's a personal one." He looked at her steadily. "He knows who you are, not as a handler, from somewhere else." She held Ronan's gaze and she did not look away, and she did not offer him anything immediately because what he was saying was true, and the truth of it was something she had been sitting with since the moment she recognized the operative's training signature, and it was a truth that connected to a part of her history that she had not put in any file, classified or otherwise. Vaughn looked between them. He had the good sense to stay quiet. She said to Ronan, "There is a version of my background that you are cleared to know, and a version that is above your clearance level. What I can tell you is that the people who sent tonight's package did not only know you were here, they knew I would come." Ronan said, "They sent the package knowing you would be here." She said, "They sent the package because I would be here. Eliminating you was the objective. But eliminating me along with you removed the only handler who had full access to what the project produced and where it went after the termination paperwork was filed. Vaughn said slowly, "They needed both of you gone." She said, "They needed the record gone. We are the record." The corridor was quiet except for Chen's radio and the low sound of the hospital's ventilation system, and somewhere on the floor from behind the closed door of room 110, the sound of Mr. Aldrich coughing, which was the most ordinary sound that had existed in this building for the last 2 hours, and which landed in the silence with an almost unbearable normality. Ronan said, 45 minutes is a long time. She said, "I know." He said, "If they know the package failed, they will send a follow-up. Standard protocol for a failed termination at this classification is a secondary authorization within 30 minutes of loss of contact." Vaughn said, "How long has it been since the last contact from the package team?" Kaylin looked at the clock on the nurse's station wall. She did the math. She said 21 minutes. The three of them stood with that number for a moment. Vaughn got on his radio and he started tightening the perimeter with a specificity and urgency that had not been in his voice at the beginning of the night, pulling Chen from the stairwell to the east exit, repositioning Harmon to the lobby with strict instructions on who was allowed through the front doors and how any resistance was to be handled. He was adapting, she realized, not just to the tactical situation, but to the understanding of it, the deeper understanding that had been building in him all night, that what he had walked into tonight was not a security operation, but a cover-up, and that the cover-up had come for him along with everyone else. She said to Ronan quietly, "When the extraction team arrives, there will be a debrief. It will be long and it will not be comfortable, and they will ask you things that they already know the answers to, because that is how verification works. I need you to give them everything." Ronan said everything. She said everything the project produced, everything you witnessed, every name, every date, every location, all of it. He said, "And if some of what I witnessed involves people who are still operating inside the committee," she said, "especially then." He looked at her. The red emergency lighting made his face look harder than it was, she thought, or maybe it made it look exactly as hard as it was, which was hard in the way that things are hard when they have been through enough to become permanent. He said, "You came here knowing this was going to end like this, with all of it coming out." She said, "I came here knowing it needed to." He said, "That's not a safe position." She said, "No, it isn't." He said, "And you took it anyway." She looked at him and she said the thing that she had not said to anyone since she accepted this assignment, not to the man who gave her the assignment, not to the woman who authenticated her call 20 minutes ago, not to anyone who had asked her in any of the 11 months leading up to tonight, why she had taken a mission that offered essentially no professional protection and a significant personal exposure. She said someone had to. Ronan was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he was not going to respond. Then he said in a voice that was quieter than anything he had said all night, "The last handler, her name was Mercer." Kaylin said, "I know." He said she said the same thing when I asked her why she took the assignment. He stopped. 2 months later, she was gone. The weight of that settled over both of them, and Kaylin did not move away from it and did not offer him anything that would reduce it because it was real, and he had earned the right to say it, and she had accepted the full knowledge of it when she took this job, and flinching from it now would be a dishonesty she was not willing to offer him. She said, "I know about Mercer. I read everything about Mercer, and I am not going to tell you that what happened to her can't happen to me because I don't know that, and you would know if I was lying." She paused. "What I can tell you is that the call I just made and the authorization I just triggered changes the landscape in a way that Mercer did not have the opportunity to trigger. The people who ordered tonight know that, which is why what happens in the next 24 minutes matters more than anything that came before it." Ronan looked at her with an expression that was not quite trust and not quite something less than trust, but was the very specific thing that exists in the space between them, the consideration of trust. The weighing of it, the almost arrival at it that a person makes when they have been damaged enough that arriving fully is no longer something they do quickly or without cost. He said, "Tell me what you need," and she did. She laid it out with the precision she had been trained for and the clarity that the situation required. And as she spoke, she watched Vaughn listening from the corridor entrance, absorbing it, adjusting to it, and she watched Ronan's expression move from assessment to decision, and she felt the three of them arrive in that moment at the particular alignment that only comes when a shared danger has burned away everything that is not essential, and what is left is exactly enough. Then Chen's voice came through Vaughna's radio, tight and immediate. He said, "Captain, front entrance. We have a vehicle. It's not the extraction team." Vaughn said, "How many?" Chen said, "I can't tell yet. Windows are dark, but it's sitting at the entrance and it's been there for 4 minutes and nobody has gotten out." Ronan said, "They're waiting for something." Kalen said, "They're waiting for a signal from the package team." Vaughn said, "A signal that's not coming." She said, "Which means in approximately 60 seconds they stop waiting." The corridor held its breath. The red strips along the floor burned steady and low. From room 110. Mr. Aldrich had stopped coughing. Somewhere in the building, a monitor beeped its patient rhythm, indifferent to everything. Vaughn looked at Kalen. She looked at Ronan. Ronan looked at the far end of the corridor, at the lobby exit, at the direction of whatever was sitting in the dark outside the front entrance of Crest Haven Medical Center, engine running, windows dark, waiting for a signal that was never going to come. He said, "Then we go to them." Vaughn said, "We go to them," and his voice carried the particular flatness of a man who has just heard someone else say the thing he was already thinking and has decided that agreeing with it is less important than making it work. He was on his radio before the sentence was fully out, pulling Chen back from the lobby entrance, repositioning Harmon to cover the east exit in case the vehicle outside was a diversion for a second approach from the rear, which was standard doctrine for a follow-up authorization at this level, and which Kalen had already flagged mentally as the move she would make if she were on the other side of this. Ronan was already moving toward the lobby corridor. She said, "Ronan, we don't know how many are in that vehicle." He said without stopping, "Doesn't change the math. If they come in, they choose the ground. If we go to them, we choose it." Vaughn, falling into step beside her, said quietly, "He's right." She said, "I know he's right. I want to know if he's ready for whatever comes out of that vehicle." Vaughn said, "Are any of us?" She did not answer that because the honest answer was complicated, and the complicated answer was not useful right now. What was useful was the lobby layout she had memorized on her second day at Crest Haven, the position of the front desk, and the waiting area seating, and the 2 side corridors that branched off the main entrance, and the single most important architectural fact about that lobby, which was that the front entrance had a set of inner and outer doors with a 6-foot vestibule between them, a standard hospital airlock design that created a natural choke point where a small coordinated group could manage a larger incoming force if they had the positioning and the preparation, and if nobody on the inside made a mistake. They had 23 seconds, she calculated, before the vehicle outside stopped waiting. She was wrong. They had 12. The outer doors opened just as Ronan reached the lobby, and the people coming through them were not the cautious, tactical entry of the first wave. They were moving fast, and they were moving with the specific, purposeful aggression of people who have received word that stealth is no longer the operational priority, that whatever cover existed for this mission has been burned, and that the only remaining objective is completion before the situation becomes irrecoverable. 3 of them through the outer doors, stopping in the vestibule when the inner doors didn't open, which they wouldn't because Chen had locked them down from the security panel at the nurse's station 12 minutes ago. Ronan stopped at the inner door. He put his back to the wall beside it and looked at Kalen and held up 3 fingers. She nodded. She had already counted them through the glass. Vaughn was 2 steps behind her and to her left, and his weapon was up, and his breathing was controlled, and she had a moment to think that whatever she had misjudged about him at the beginning of tonight, she had not misjudged his steadiness. Through the inner door glass, and one of the 3 men in the vestibule pulled a device from his jacket, not a weapon, a bypass unit for the electronic lock. He was good with it, faster than most, and the lock on the inner doors disengaged in under 8 seconds. Ronan let the door open 3/4 of the way, then he stepped through it. What happened next occupied approximately 11 seconds and was too fast and too specific to narrate in sequence. But the outcome was that 2 of the 3 men in the vestibule were on the floor, and the third was backed against the outer doors with Ronan's forearm across his chest and his feet not entirely on the ground, and Vaughn was through the inner door with his weapon covering the outer entrance, and Kalen was beside Ronan looking at the man against the door and recognizing again the training signature. The same unit, the same program, and something else this time. She recognized his face, not from a file, from before the files, from a period of her history that existed in no classified document and in no operational record, and that she had spent considerable energy keeping exactly that way. She said, "Donovan." The man looked at her. His expression did not change in the way that expressions change when someone is surprised. It changed in the way that expressions change when someone has been expecting something for a long time and has finally arrived at the moment of it, and the arrival is both a relief and a reckoning. He said, "Hello, Kaylin." Ronan's arm did not move. He looked at Kaylin with a question he did not ask out loud. She said to Ronan, "Give him room." Ronan gave him room. Not much. Enough. Donovan straightened his jacket with the careful, deliberate motion of someone buying time to think, and she let him have the time because she needed it too. She had not seen this man in 4 years. The last time she had seen him was in a room very different from this one, in a conversation very different from this one, in a version of her life that she had closed a door on when she accepted this assignment and had not expected to see walk back through it wearing a tactical vest and a face that knew too much about her. Vaughn said, "You know this man?" She said, "Yes." Vaughn said, "From where?" She said, "From before." Donovan said, "She trained in the same program that built the assets. 2 years before, they shifted the program to neural integration." He looked at her. She was one of the first candidates. She didn't complete the integration phase. She went handler track instead. He paused. But she still has the early conditioning, which is why she's faster than she looks and why she knew the 7th contingency training signature on site and why the people who authorized tonight's package wanted her removed as much as they wanted the asset removed. Vaughn looked at Kaylin. She looked back at him, and she did not deflect, and she did not qualify. She said, "He's right." Vaughn said, "You were a candidate for what they did to Ronan." She said, an early version of it, before they understood the neurological risks well enough to build the implant. I went through the conditioning protocols, the behavioral frameworks, the response architecture, all of it except the hardware integration." She paused, "Which means I carry the same information in my head that Ronan carries in his implant, without the kill switch." The lobby was very quiet. Donovan said, "That's why they need both of you gone. A handler with full protocol knowledge and an asset with hardware documentation of every operation the project ran. Together, you're a complete record. Separately, you're each a problem. Together, you're a catastrophe for 12 people who are currently sitting on a joint oversight committee and have been signing authorization documents for operations that were never supposed to exist." Vaughn said slowly, "You came here to tell her that." Donovan looked at him. He said, "I came here because I was sent here. What I do now that I'm here is a separate question." He reached into his jacket. Ronan moved and Donovan stopped moving and said very carefully, "Inside left pocket. Phone, that's all." He waited for Ronan's fractional acknowledgement and then reached in slowly and brought out a phone and held it toward Kaylin. She took it. The screen showed a document, not long, 2 pages. She read the first paragraph and felt something shift in her chest, not fear, something older than fear, the particular visceral drop that comes when a suspicion you have been managing for months is confirmed in writing. She said, "When did you get this?" Donovan said 6 hours ago. It was transmitted to the secondary contacts for tonight's operation as the mission brief. "I was not supposed to have a copy." He paused. "I have a copy because 4 years ago, before any of this, you saved my life in a situation that I have never discussed with anyone and never will, and I have been carrying that debt and waiting to see if there was ever going to be a moment where paying it meant something." He looked at her steadily. "This is the moment." Vaughn said, "What does it say?" She looked up from the phone. She said, "It's the termination authorization, full document, with signatures." She stopped. "There are 4 signatures. 3 of them are from committee members I expected. The 4th," she stopped again. Vaughn said, "What?" She said, "The 4th signature is from the director of the verification office, the office that my extraction call tonight is currently being routed through." The lobby absorbed that. Ronan said, "The call you made on the satellite unit?" She said, "The authentication was real. The hold order was real, but the extraction team that was authorized through that office?" She looked at the phone. She looked at Donovan. "Tell me the extraction team is not part of this." Donovan said, "I can't tell you that." Vaughn said something under his breath that was not suitable for a civilian environment. Ronan said to Kaylin with no visible alarm, but with a precision that she had come to understand was how he expressed urgency, 45 minutes from your call. How long ago was the call?" She looked at the clock on the lobby wall. She said 31 minutes ago. Ronan said 14 minutes. She said yes. He said, so the extraction team that may be coming here to extract us or may be coming here to finish what the package started that will arrive in 14 minutes, and we have no way to know which it is until they're here. She said, that's correct. Vaughn said, we need to get out of this building. She said, if we move the asset externally before extraction team arrival, we lose the controlled environment in the perimeter we've established. We also expose Ronan to open ground where, Vaughn said, where a team that wants him dead has every advantage, I know. But if we stay and the extraction team is compromised, we've handed them everything they need in a contained space with one exit. Donovan said, there's a third option. Both of them looked at him. He said, the satellite unit you use for the call, the channel you open goes both ways. If the authentication on the other end was genuine, and the director's involvement was unilateral rather than systemic, then there are people on that channel who don't know about the director's signature and who will act on it if you give it to them in the next 12 minutes. Kalen said, and if the authentication wasn't genuine and the channel was controlled from the start, Donovan said, then we know in about 12 minutes and we spend the time between now and then getting the asset into a position where the extraction team can't simply walk in and take him. Vaughn looked at Kalen. Kalen looked at the phone. She looked at Donovan, at the face of a man she had not trusted with anything in 4 years, at the face of a man who had come through the front door of this building with a termination package and had stopped, and she made the calculation that she had been trained to make, the one that involved weighing what someone stood to gain against what they had already chosen to do. And what Donovan had chosen to do was put a document in her hand that exposed him as a source and gave her a weapon that she needed and that he did not have to give her. She said, get me the satellite unit. She said it to Vaughn, and he was already moving back through the lobby corridor toward the nurse's station, and she looked at Donovan and said, the two men Ronan put down in the vestibule. Donovan said, they'll be about for a while. They're not the problem. She said, the vehicle outside. Donovan said, one driver. He won't move without a signal from me, and I'm not giving him one. She said, and the rest of the team. Donovan said, there is no rest of the team. What you contained tonight was the full package. 6 operatives, 1 driver. The authorization did not allow for a larger force because a larger force at a civilian medical facility could not be made to look like anything other than what it was. Ronan said 6 operatives for 1 asset and 1 handler. That's overbuilt for a standard termination. Donovan looked at him for the first time directly, and there was something in his expression that was not quite apology and not quite shame, but occupied the space adjacent to both. He said, they knew about the implant. They knew about your capabilities. They didn't want to leave margin. Ronan received this with the same stillness he received everything. He said, they built me to be unmatchable and then sent 6 people because they were afraid of what they built. That's the whole story, isn't it? Donovan said, that's most of it. Vaughn came back with the satellite unit. He handed it to Kalen, and she powered it up and re-entered the authentication sequence. The 47-second connection time felt longer this time. She counted it without appearing to count it. The same woman's voice from before. Authenticate. She gave the authentication. The pause shorter this time. The woman said, you're connected. Go ahead. Kalen said, I need to report a potential compromise at the director level of the verification office. I have documentary evidence in the form of a signed termination authorization for Asset 0 that carries the director's signature alongside 3 committee members. I need to reach someone above the verification office chain with authority to issue an independent verification of the extraction team currently en route to this location. She paused. I have 11 minutes. A long silence, long enough that she thought the channel had dropped. Then a voice that was neither the woman nor the man from the previous call. A third voicemail, younger, with a particular focused calm of someone who has just been handed a situation that required him to make a decision of his pay grade and has decided to make it anyway. He said, Handler Cross, this is Deputy Director Marsh Internal Oversight. I am looking at a flag that was placed on your authentication the moment you reconnected to this channel. That flag was placed by the director's office 40 minutes ago. Can you tell me what you have? She said, I can send it to you directly. The document is on a secure phone in my possession. She looked at Donovan. Donovan was already moving. He had a field transmission cable in his vest, the kind that connected a tactical phone to a satellite unit for direct document transfer, and he connected it with the practiced efficiency of someone who had come here prepared to do exactly this. The document went through in 40 seconds. Deputy Director Marsh was quiet for 90 seconds. It was the most significant 90 seconds of the night. Kaylin held the satellite unit and counted her breathing and did not look at Ronan because looking at him right now would cost her something she needed to keep. Marsh said, "The signature is verified. I am issuing an immediate administrative hold on the director pending investigation. I am also redirecting the extraction team currently en route to your location to a staging point 3 miles out pending independent verification of their chain of command." He paused. "A clean extraction team with verified chain of command will be with you in 22 minutes. Handler Cross, you are to maintain asset security at your current location. Do not allow anyone entry to the building who cannot provide the following verification code." He gave her a 6-digit sequence. She repeated it back. He confirmed it. "We're coming, Handler Cross. Hold the line." The channel closed. She looked up. Vaughn was watching her. Ronan was watching her. Donovan was standing slightly apart from both of them with his hands visible and his jacket still open, the body language of someone who has committed to a position and is giving everyone around him every possible assurance of that commitment. She said to the room, 22 minutes, clean extraction team, original team has been redirected. Vaughn exhaled. It was a single controlled exhale, but it carried the full weight of the last 2 hours in it. Ronan said, "And the director?" She said, "Administrative hold, investigation to follow." He said, "Administrative hold." She said, "It's the beginning of accountability, not the end of it. The document Donovan brought changes the entire authorization record. Every operation the project ran that carried the director's oversight is now subject to review. The committee members whose signatures are on that document are going to spend the next several years in very small rooms answering very specific questions." She looked at him. "It's not fast, but it's real." He looked at her and she could see him calibrating that the distance between what he had needed for 2 years, the recognition that what was done to him was wrong, and that the people who did it would face some consequence for it, and what accountability actually looked like when it arrived, which was slower and quieter and more procedural than anything that felt sufficient. He said, "I know it's real." He paused. "I've just spent a long time not believing real was available." Donovan said from across the lobby. "It wasn't. 6 months ago, this document didn't exist. The authorization trail was clean. Somebody made a mistake in the last month, put a signature on something they should have kept verbal, and that mistake is the reason tonight happened the way it happened." He looked at Kaylin. "The reason they moved now with a package this size in a civilian facility is because they found out the document existed and they needed the 2 of you gone before anyone could put it in front of someone with authority." Vaughn said, "How did they know the document existed?" Donovan said, "Because I found it, and I am not as invisible as I used to be." Nobody asked him to explain that. The shape of it was clear enough. He had been inside their operation, had found something he wasn't supposed to find, and the people he worked for had not known he found it, but had registered the moment of exposure as a security event and had accelerated their timeline accordingly. He had been working against them from inside long enough to find the document, but not long enough to be clean when it happened. Kaylin said, "Are you burned?" Donovan said, "I was burned the moment I walked through that door." She said, "Then you'll come in with the extraction team and go through the same debrief as everyone else." She paused. "You'll be protected." He looked at her. He said, "You don't have to do that." She said, "You brought me the document." "Yes, I do." He was quiet. He looked at the floor and then he looked up, and there was something in his face that she had not seen there in the one time she had seen his face before 4 years ago. Something that looked less like the composed operational mask of a trained agent and more like the expression of someone who is relieved in a way they had not allowed themselves to anticipate being. He said, "All right." Ronan had been standing at the inner door throughout this exchange, maintaining his position, keeping watch on the outer vestibule and the entrance beyond it. He said without turning, "The driver in the vehicle outside, he'll be monitoring for check-in from the package team." Kaylin said, "How long before he escalates?" Ronan said, "He should have escalated 8 minutes ago. The fact that he hasn't means he has a longer check-in window or he has instructions to wait for a specific signal. Either way, he's not going to wait much longer." Vaughn said, I can bring him in. Kalen said, take Harmon with you. Approach from the east side of the entrance, not the front. If he sees two people coming straight at the vehicle, he'll move. Vaughn said, I know how to approach a vehicle handler cross. She said, I know you do, Captain. I'm saying it out loud because I need to hear the plan confirmed before it happens, not because I think you need instruction. He looked at her with the expression he had been developing over the course of the night, the one that was not warmth and was not agreement, but was the specific regard of someone who has come to understand that the person they underestimated has been one step ahead at every turn and has chosen not to be unkind about it. He said confirmed and went to get Harmon. Ronan moved from the door to where Kalen was standing. He did not do it the way people move when they want to say something. He did it the way he did everything with economy, with purpose. And when he was beside her, he stood and looked at the lobby entrance and said quietly, when the clean extraction team arrives, the debrief, she said yes. He said, you're going to give them your full background, the conditioning protocols, the early program, all of it. She said yes. He said, that exposes you to the same review that's going to apply to the committee. She said, I'm aware. He said, you didn't do anything wrong. Being a candidate isn't the same as being complicit. She said, I know that. The review will confirm it. She paused. I hope. He looked at her sideways. She looked back at him. And something happened in the exchange that was quieter than anything that had happened in the preceding 2 hours. Something that did not need the architecture of crisis to exist. Something that was simply two people who had been through the same darkness, from different sides of it, recognizing each other in the aftermath. He said, for what it's worth, the 3-letter designation you gave me in that room, when I was still running the assessment and you said it and I heard it. He stopped. I knew before I knew. Something in the conditioning recognized you before my conscious mind could access the memory. She said the program called it imprint resonance, the way the handler's voice pattern integrates with the asset's behavioral architecture. He said, I know what the program called it. He paused. I'm telling you what it felt like. She did not say anything. She let it be what it was, which was a thing said between two people in a quiet moment after a very loud night, which was more than either of them had expected to have. From outside, she heard Vaughn's voice controlled and directive, and then the sound of a car door, and then nothing for 30 seconds, and then Vaughn's voice on the radio saying, driver is contained, the vehicle is secure. She exhaled. 16 minutes to extraction. The lobby was quiet. The red emergency lighting in the east corridor was still running. Mr. Aldrich in room 110 had gone entirely silent, which probably meant he had gone to sleep, which was the most reassuring thing that had happened all night. Denise was back at the nurse's station because of course she was maintaining her floor with the particular professionalism of someone who had decided that the best response to extraordinary circumstances was extraordinary competence in the ordinary ones. Chen checked in from the east exit. Clear. Harmon checked in from the lobby perimeter. Clear. Donovan sat down on one of the lobby waiting chairs with the careful, slightly stunned movement of someone who has been running on adrenaline for several hours and has just had it leave. He sat and he looked at his hands and he did not say anything, and Kalen left him to it. Ronan did not sit. He stood and he watched and he waited. And she stood beside him and waited too. And the building held them both in its quiet emergency light while the clock on the lobby wall moved toward the number that meant it was over. 14 minutes later, a vehicle pulled into the hospital entrance and stopped, and 3 people got out of it, and the first one to the door gave the verification code through the intercom without being asked, and Kalen heard the 6-digit sequence and confirmed it against what Marsh had given her and said into the intercom, confirmed, come through. The inner door opened. The lead agent, a woman Kalen had never met but whose credentials she verified in 40 seconds with the satellite unit, looked at the lobby, at Ronan, at Donovan, in the waiting chair at Vaughn, coming in from the east corridor with Harmon behind him, and she said with the measured efficiency of someone who has been briefed on a situation and is now looking at how far the situation has traveled from the brief handler cross, I'm Agent Solis, Independent Verification Division. We have a secure transport ready and a facility prepped for full debrief. She looked at Ronan. Asset 0 is ambulatory. Kalen said, his name is Ronan. Solis looked at her. Then she looked at Ronan. She said, Mr. Ronan, are you ready to move? Ronan looked at Kalen. She gave him the smallest nod. He said to Solace, yes. Solace said to the room, then we move, all of you, now. And they moved. All of them. Out through the lobby doors into the early morning air, toward the vehicles and the transport, in the beginning of the long, complicated, necessary work of making the record whole. And as they went, Kaylin Cross, who had walked into Crest Haven Medical Center 6 days ago with a low ponytail and a travel mug, and the careful, constructed ordinariness of someone hiding everything important about herself, walked out of it with none of that construction left and every important thing fully visible, and she found her own quiet surprise that the absence of the cover was not loss. It was relief. The transport vehicle smelled like industrial upholstery and recycled air, and Kaylin sat in it with her hands in her lap and her eyes forward and the satellite unit on the seat beside her, and tried to remember the last time she had been in a moving vehicle without a cover identity riding along with her. She couldn't place it. That was the thing about covers. You wore them long enough and the line between the performance and the person underneath it became something you had to locate deliberately rather than something you simply knew. Ronan was across from her. Donovan was beside him. Vaughn and Harmon were in the second vehicle behind them. Agent Solace was in the front seat. On a phone call, she was keeping quiet enough that Kaylin could hear the cadence, but not the words, and the cadence was not relaxed. Ronan said to Kaylin without preamble, "She's been on that call since we left the building." She said, "I know." He said, "The tone changed about 2 minutes in." She said, "I noticed." Donovan said from beside Ronan, "Something happened while we were in the lobby." She said, "Yes, I think so." She watched Solace's shoulders and she listened to the cadence, and she ran through the possibilities with the particular focused calm that the conditioning had given her the ability to process threat variables in a state of apparent stillness that had been the thing she had been most grateful for over the years and most ambivalent about in equal measure. Because the same architecture that made her good at the work also made it difficult to stop doing the work even in moments that did not require it, even in moments that were supposed to be the aftermath. Solace ended the call. She turned in her seat and looked at Kaylin directly. She said, "Deputy Director Marsh is in custody." Nobody in the vehicle spoke. Solace said, "He was detained 20 minutes ago at the Oversight Building. He has been placed on administrative hold pending investigation into his role in the authorization chain for tonight's operation." Kaylin said slowly, "Marsh placed the flag on my authentication the moment I reconnected. That was what he told me." Solace said, "The flag was placed by the director's office. Marsh received notification of it when I authenticated your channel for the second call. He then made 4 outgoing calls in a 12-minute window, 2 of which were to numbers connected to the continuation project's operational infrastructure." Donovan said, "He was playing both sides." Solace said, "He gave you the verification code and redirected the original extraction team because he needed you to trust him long enough to bring the asset and the document out of the building voluntarily. A voluntary transfer is cleaner than a forced extraction. Less to explain afterward." Kaylin said, "He was going to intercept us at the staging point." Solace said, "That is our current assessment, yes." Ronan said, "Which means the clean extraction team." Solace looked at him. She said, "I received my orders directly from the Inspector General's office, bypassing the verification chain entirely. My credentials and my teams are verifiable through a separate channel that has no connection to the director, the deputy director, or the committee members named in the document." She paused. "You can verify that now if you need to. I would rather you did because the next 12 hours are going to require you to trust this process, and I would prefer that trust to be based on confirmation rather than hope." Kaylin looked at her for a long moment. She said, "Give me the verification channel." Solace gave it. Kaylin used the satellite unit. The verification came back clean in under a minute, routed through a pathway that Kaylin recognized as genuinely outside the compromised chain, and she sat back and said, "Confirmed." Solace said, "Good, Chasen," and turned back to the front. Donovan exhaled. It was the first fully unguarded thing he had done since he walked through the hospital entrance. The first sound that came from somewhere below the operational layer, and Kaylin heard it and understood it and felt something parallel to it moving through her own chest. Ronan said quietly, "How many people in the authorization chain are compromised?" Solace said from the front without turning, "That is one of the things the debrief will establish. What we know now is 4 committee members, the director and the deputy director. What we don't know is how far the operational infrastructure extends below them." Ronan said, "It extends further." Solis said, "We believe so." Ronan said, "I can tell you exactly how far. I can give you names, dates, operational codes, facility locations, and the specific decisions that were made at each level and by whom. I have total recall of every mission I ran under the program, every briefing, every debrief, every conversation I had in any room connected to that project, from the first day of my integration to the day the mission went wrong, and I ended up in a hospital bed in Crest Haven." He paused. "That's what the implant does. Among other things, it retains." Solis was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Ronan, I want to be clear with you about something. The debrief facility we are taking you to is staffed by people who understand the nature of what you carry and who will treat both you and the information with the appropriate level of care. You will not be treated as a database to be accessed. You will be treated as a person giving testimony." Ronan said, "That would be a first." Solis said, "I know." She said it without qualification, without the softening that people usually add when they are acknowledging something that makes them uncomfortable, and the absence of the softening was the most honest thing anyone in an official capacity had said to Ronan in 2 years. And Kaylin watched him receive it and saw something in his face shift, not dramatically, not visibly, to anyone who did not know what to look for, but she knew what to look for. The vehicle stopped, not at the staging facility. The driver said something to Solis in a low voice, and Solis was immediately on her phone, and Kaylin said, "What is it?" And Solis said, "Roadblock ahead, law enforcement, and it may be standard." And her tone said clearly that she did not believe it was standard. Ronan said, "How many vehicles?" The driver said, "2 patrol units and 1 unmarked." Ronan said, "Unmarked is the one to watch." Kaylin said to Solis, "Can you raise the Inspector General's office directly from here?" Solis was already dialing. She was on the call in 40 seconds, and she gave her identification and the vehicle's location and the situation in 30 words. And the person on the other end of the line said something that made Solis's expression go from controlled tension to something more complicated. She ended the call. She turned to the driver. She said, "Go through." He said, "The roadblock," she said, "is not authorized by any law enforcement agency connected to this jurisdiction. I have confirmation from the Inspector General's office. The units at the roadblock are not who they are claiming to be. Go through." He said, "Go through" means. She said, "It means drive. They will move." They did not move. The driver brought the vehicle to a slow stop 20 feet from the blockade, and the unmarked vehicle's door opened, and a man in a suit got out and walked toward them with the specific unhurried authority of someone who expects compliance and has rarely not received it. Ronan looked at the man's walk. He said, "I know him." Kaylin said, "Who is he?" Ronan said, "His name is Calloway. He ran the integration phase of my program. He was the one who designed the kill switch protocol." He paused. "He is the reason the kill switch exists. He built it because he knew from the beginning that the program would eventually produce something it could not control through conventional means, and he wanted a failsafe." He paused again. "He also knew that a failsafe held by a handler was a failsafe held by a person, and a person could be reached." Kaylin said, "Calloway, he's not on the committee." Ronan said, "He's not on any document. He designed the program from inside a classification layer that doesn't appear in the authorization trail. He's the architect. Everything the committee signed, they signed because he told them to." Donovan said under his breath, "He was never in the file." Kaylin said, "No, he wasn't." And she felt the full weight of that land on her, the recognition that the document Donovan had brought her, the 4 signatures, the director, the deputy director, the committee members. All of it was real, and all of it was also the surface, the visible layer of a structure that went deeper than anything she had accessed. And the man walking toward their vehicle right now was the foundation of that structure. Solis said, "I need a name and a classification number for the Inspector General's office." Ronan gave them to her, both of them, from memory, without hesitation. Solis was on the phone before the second number was finished. The call lasted 40 seconds. When she ended it, she looked at the man still walking toward the vehicle, now 15 feet away, and she said to the driver, "Lock the doors." Then she rolled down her window 3 inches and said loudly enough to be heard, "This vehicle is under the direct authorization of the Inspector General's office. Any interference with its movement or its passengers is a federal obstruction offense. You are being recorded. Step back." Calloway stopped walking. He was close enough now that Kaylin could see his face through the windshield. She had never seen his face before. She had read descriptions of him, had found his absence in documents. The way you find a shape by the space around it, had understood for months that he existed without ever having a name or a face to put to the understanding. And now she had both, and he was standing 12 feet from the vehicle in a suit that was too expensive for a man who was not supposed to exist. And he was looking at the window behind which she and Ronan were sitting with an expression that she had not expected. He was looking at them with something that was almost pride. She understood it in the same moment she found it repellent. This was a man who had built something extraordinary and had protected it with lethal force and had authorized the deaths of people who threatened it, and standing here looking at what his program had produced in the form of Ronan fully conscious and fully mobile and fully functional in ways that should not have been possible given the damage he had sustained, Calloway was looking at his own work and finding it good. And the horror of that, the absolute moral horror of a man who could look at all of tonight's wreckage and feel satisfaction settled into Kaylin's chest like cold water. She said to Ronan, "Don't look at him." He said, "I'm not." She said, "Good." The two patrol units at the blockade were moving, not toward them, away from them. The units were pulling their vehicles out of the road, and Kaylin understood that the phone calls Solis had been making had reached the right people in the right order, and that the people operating those units had just received a communication that recategorized the situation they were standing in, and that recategorization was moving faster than Calloway had anticipated. He pulled out his phone. He made a call. He listened. His expression from behind the windshield changed in a way that she watched with the full attention of someone who has been waiting all night for the moment when the person at the center of everything finally understands that the center has shifted. He looked at the vehicle one more time. He looked directly at the window where she and Ronan were sitting, as if he could see through the glass, as if the 20 years he had spent building something were visible in his face, and he wanted someone to witness it before the consequences arrived. Then 3 federal vehicles came from the opposite direction and stopped, and 6 people got out of them with credentials and authority that were not complicated, and Calloway's phone went back into his pocket, and his hands went to his sides, and his face went to the particular stillness of a man who has reached the end of a very long road and has run out of moves. Ronan watched through the glass as Calloway was walked to one of the federal vehicles. He watched with the complete composed attention he brought to everything, and when it was done, when the vehicle door closed and Calloway was inside it, Ronan turned away from the window, and he did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "He never thought it would end." Kaylin said, "People who build things rarely do." He said, "He built me to last. He built the program to last. He put a kill switch inside me because he was afraid of what would happen if I couldn't be stopped, not because he planned to use it, but because he needed to know it was there." He stopped. And the kill switch is what saved everyone tonight. The thing he built as a failsafe for himself became the thing that brought him down. She said, "Yes." He said, "That should feel like something." She said, "Does it?" He was quiet. She waited because she had learned in the course of this night that Ronan's silences were not emptiness. They were processing. They were the sound of a man who had learned to keep everything internal and doing the careful, thoughtful work of externalizing something true. He said, "It feels like the first morning after a very long night, where you're not sure yet if you're allowed to stop watching the door." She said, "You're allowed." He looked at her. He said, "How do you know?" She said, "Because I'm the handler. It's my job to tell you when it's safe to stand down." He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then something in his face did the thing she had been watching it almost do all night, the thing it had been approaching and retreating from through every exchange and every corridor, in every room, the thing that was not hardness, and was not the operational mask, and was not the careful managed presentation of someone who had been trained to reveal nothing. He said, "Then I'm standing down." The vehicle began moving again. The roadblock was clear. Solis was on a final call with the Inspector General's office, confirming the apprehension in the route and the facility arrival time, and Donovan was looking out the window with the expression of a man processing the distance between where he started tonight and where he is ending it, and Kaylin sat with her hands in her lap and let the motion of the vehicle carry her forward. The debrief facility was a 40-minute drive from Cresthaven. When they arrived, Vaughn's vehicle pulled in behind them, and Vaughn got out with Harmon and stood in the early morning air with the look of a man who has been awake for a very long time and has spent that time doing something that mattered, and who is not entirely sure yet how to hold that. He walked to Kaylin as she stepped out of the transport. He said, my north stairwell team. She said, they'll be located. If they're alive, they'll be found. If they're not. She stopped. I'm sorry, Captain. I made a calculation in that building, and your men were inside it. I stand behind the calculation, and I am still sorry for the cost of it. Vaughn looked at her. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he was going to say something that would require a response she did not have ready. Then he said, you kept the rest of them alive, my full team -2, in a situation that had a termination package, a compromised chain of command, and an active asset. He paused. The calculation was right. She said, I hope so. He said, I know so. I've been running numbers since we left the building. He extended his hand. She took it. The handshake was brief and firm and carried the particular weight of something finished and something else, something without a clean name begun. He said, for what it's worth, Cross, I misjudged you. She said, you were supposed to. He said, still. She said, still. Inside the facility, the debrief began within the hour. It was as Kaylin had told Ronan, it would be long and specific and not comfortable. It was staffed by people from the Inspector General's office and 2 independent analysts from outside the program's classification umbrella, entirely people who came to the material without the framework that made the material make sense, and therefore asked questions that were sometimes frustratingly basic and occasionally unexpectedly exactly the right question asked from exactly the right angle. Ronan's debrief ran for 9 hours. Kaylin was present for the first 4 at his request and then was taken to a separate room for her own debrief, which ran for 6 hours and covered her conditioning history, her handler training the full record of how she had come to be assigned to Asset 0, and the period of her background that existed in no file, the period that Donovan had referenced in the hospital lobby, and that she now laid out completely and without omission for the first time in her professional life. It was the most exhausting 6 hours she could remember, not because the questions were hostile. They were not hostile. It was exhausting in the specific way that telling the whole truth is exhausting when you have spent years carrying the parts of it that you kept back when the full weight of the thing finally moves from inside you to outside you, and you feel the shift of it, and you are not sure in the immediate aftermath what it means to be lighter. She was not charged with anything. She was not suspended. She was placed on administrative review, which was the appropriate procedural response to the disclosure of undocumented conditioning history. And the analyst who told her this said, with the careful neutrality of someone making sure they were not making a promise, they could not keep that the review was expected to be straightforward, given the nature of what she had disclosed and the context in which she had disclosed it. She said, and after the review, the analyst said, that depends on what you want. She said, what are my options? The analyst said, you can return to handler track with a full disclosure record on file, which actually increases your clearance eligibility in certain divisions because you no longer carry undisclosed material. You can request a transition to a training or oversight role within the program's successor structure, assuming the Inspector General establishes one, or you can request a full separation, clean record, no operational obligations. He paused. Given what you did tonight, all 3 are available to you. She said, I need time to answer that. He said, you have time. She found Ronan in a corridor outside the debrief rooms 2 hours later. He was sitting in one of the chairs along the wall with a paper cup of coffee that had clearly been sitting there long enough to be cold, and he was looking at nothing in particular with the composed private expression of someone doing internal work that did not require an audience. She sat down beside him. He said, how was yours? She said, long yours. He said, longer. He looked at the coffee cup. They gave me a list of the operations I described, the ones they're going to investigate first. There were 47 of them. She said, that's a significant number. He said, it's only the ones I participated in directly. There are more I know of secondarily. He paused. It's going to take a long time. She said, yes. He said, will you be around for it? She looked at him. She said, I was asked what I want to do next. He said, what did you say? She said, I needed time. He nodded. He picked up the cold coffee and looked at it and put it back down. He said, they told me the implant needs to be assessed by a medical team that's outside the program's original infrastructure. New people, clean eyes. He paused. They also told me that depending on what the assessment finds, removal may be an option. She said, how do you feel about that? He said, I don't know yet. The implant is what I am in a functional sense. It's what makes me capable of the things I'm capable of. But it's also, he stopped. He looked at his hands. It's also what made me a weapon. And I have spent a long time wondering what I am when I'm not that. She said, you're a person who has been through something most people can't conceive of, who is still here, who gave 9 hours of testimony today that is going to change the lives of people who were hurt by the same program that hurt you. That's not nothing. That's not a small amount of what? He said no. He was quiet. It's not. Donovan appeared at the far end of the corridor coming from the direction of the security processing area. He looked different from how he had looked in the hospital. The operational overlay was gone, the tactical vest was gone, and what was left was a man who looked tired in the particular way that people look tired when the thing they have been carrying for years has finally been set down and the muscles that were holding it have not yet remembered how to relax. He stopped at the chairs. He looked at Kaylin and Ronan sitting side by side in the corridor of a facility that was officially investigating the program that had shaped all three of their lives from different angles, and he said, they're going to keep me for another day. Verification. Kaylin said, that's standard. He said, I know. He paused. I just wanted to say before they take me back in. He stopped. He looked at her with the expression she had last seen in the lobby of Cresthaven, the relieved expression, the one that had not finished arriving yet, but was getting closer. You were right, in the hospital, when you said it had to come out. He paused. I knew it had to come out. I just didn't know if I had it in me to be part of how it happened. She said, you did. He said, because you made it possible to be. She said, Donovan. She stopped. She looked at him the way she had been unable to look at him in the hospital because they had not had the time or the safety for it. She said, 4 years ago, what you did, I never said thank you. He said, you didn't have to. She said, I know I didn't have to. I'm saying it now. He received it. He nodded once in the way that people nod when something has been carried between them for a long time and has finally been acknowledged properly, and the acknowledgement is complete. Then he went back down the corridor and turned the corner and was gone. Ronan said, he's a good man who made bad choices for a long time. She said, yes, he is. He said, so were most of the people the program built. He was not talking about Donovan anymore. She knew it, and he knew she knew it. She said, yes. He said, the difference is what you do when you find the door. She said, what do you mean? He said, the program is built on the idea that the door doesn't exist. That once you're inside the architecture, there is no outside, no exit, no moment where you can choose something other than what you were built to choose. He paused. But there is a door. Tonight proved it. Every person in that hospital who made a different choice than the one they were sent there to make, that was somebody finding the door. He looked at her, including me, in that room, when you asked for 60 seconds and I gave it to you. She said, you didn't have to. He said, no, we didn't. We didn't. He looked at the cold coffee cup one more time and then left it where it was. That's the whole point. The morning had fully arrived by the time Kaylin stepped outside the facility. The sky was the particular clear washed blue that comes after a night that has asked too much and given in the process more than was expected. And she stood in it and breathed air that was cold enough to be real and thought about the question the analyst had asked her. What do you want? She stood with it the way she stood with difficult things, without rushing toward an answer, without filling the space where the answer would go with noise. She thought about Cresthaven, about the East Corridor and the red emergency strips, and Mr. Aldrich asking what kind of sounds are those, and about Ronan waking up in a broken restraint and giving her 60 seconds because something in the architecture of what had been done to him recognized her voice as a voice worth listening to. She thought about Mercer. She thought about what it meant to take an assignment that offered no protection. She thought about what it meant that she was standing outside this morning and Mercer had not been standing outside hers. She thought about the word that had come to her when the cover finally dropped, when she walked out of those hospital doors with nothing hidden and everything visible. Relief. Ronan came out behind her. He stood beside her in the cold morning air, and he did not say anything, and she did not say anything, and they stood in the particular shared silence of two people who have been through the same fire from different sides and have come out of it changed in ways they have not fully mapped yet. After a while, he said, what are you going to do? She said, I'm going to stay. He said, "Handler track." She said, "I don't know the shape of it yet, but yes, whatever comes next, whatever the successor structure looks like, whatever form the work takes after the program is fully investigated and dismantled and rebuilt into something that doesn't do what this one did. Yes, I'm going to be part of that." He said, "Why?" She said what she had said to him in the hospital, because it was still true, and because true, things do not need to be more complicated than they are. She said, "Because someone has to." He stood with that. He looked at the sky. He said, "I gave 9 hours of testimony today." She said, "Yes." He said, "I'll give more tomorrow and the day after, however long it takes." She said, "I know." He said, "Is that what it feels like, choosing something?" She said, "Yes, that's exactly what it feels like." The morning held them both. The night was over. The record was open. The people who had built something in the dark and called it progress were at last standing in the light, and the light was unambiguous, and there was no more architecture of secrecy left to stand in the way of what needed to be seen. Kaylin Cross had walked into Crest Haven Medical Center as a rookie nurse with a low ponytail and a travel mug, carrying everything important about herself in silence, and she had walked out carrying it openly, and the world had not ended. It had, in the ways that mattered most, just begun.